to the finals, and Justin kicking things off with Arcanine and Fluttermane against Arcanine and Kingambit from Luca.
Again, these like Arcanine into Kingambit leads are pretty even either way to a certain extent. Of course, you do activate that Defiant, but you have the immediate threat of Will-O-Wisp, which will essentially counteract that Defiant boost and then reduce the damage even further than it was before. Thankfully for Justin, it is not the Terra Fire Kingambit. That's something that a lot of players have opted for to block those Will-O-Wisps. It is the Black Glasses Terra Dark Kingambit that we also saw back in Charlotte. And this Kingambit is capable of doing a whole lot of damage all at once, as long as you can keep it from getting burned.
I know, the thing that I immediately started to worry about was if Sucker Punch was a threat to possibly KO the Fluttermane here.
Yeah.
No Sucker Punch, just a Protect to block a possible Will-O-Wisp. The Shadow Ball from that Fluttermane connecting with the Arcanine to deal a decent chunk of damage. No burn here, and Arcanine on Luca's side of the field has the opportunity to go for something, and now it's a +2 Kingambit thanks to the Howl.
Yeah, so now if you're wondering if Sucker Punch KOs something, it's probably safe to assume it does, especially with those Black Glasses, especially if you decide to Terastallize. And so now you have to worry about if this Fluttermane stays on the field. Sure, you might want to get some more damage out with that Shadow Ball, but you have to worry about just getting Sucker Punched. And of course, Sucker Punch being a priority move would attack before that Will-O-Wisp. So a difficult spot for this Fluttermane here. You might be tempted to leave it out and try and go for some more damage on that Arcanine. Certainly another Shadow Ball would knock it out, but you probably don't get the chance to if Luca wants to cover that option here with the Sucker Punch.
For sure, and I'm very curious to see how Luca approach this turn. Will take a moment to Terastallize that Kingambit to add the Dark-type Terastallization on top of all the other boosts this Pokemon has right now. But it looked like he was targeting a Extreme Speed into the Fluttermane as well, which will not work as, well, one, it protected, but before that...
For two reasons.
For two reasons. It's also a Ghost-type Pokemon, so I think Luca very smartly here, accounting for the fact that if Fluttermane swaps out, you land the Extreme Speed on the Pokemon coming in. If Fluttermane stays in an attack, you can Sucker Punch it for the knockout. This does give Arcanine the second chance, though, to go for a Will-O-Wisp, and it will connect, but at +2 attack, that's still gonna hurt.
So, I mean, now at +2 attack and burn, you're just doing about as much damage as you would pre-burn and pre-Defiant. That Extreme Speed play was pretty cool because it covers both the swap, like you said, and also a possible Terastallization. So if the Fluttermane did stay in and go for that Fairy-type Terastallization, the Sucker Punch would be resisted, but the Extreme Speed probably makes up that lack of damage due to the resisted Sucker Punch. And so it's a neat play. I think the only thing that goes wrong there is a Protect, which did happen, unfortunately, for Luca. That is nice for Justin, though. A lot of players opt to take Choice Specs on Fluttermane, which is a very, very strong item on it. But Justin opting for the special attack boosting Booster Energy instead, which you get almost the same special attack boost, but you give yourself the flexibility of changing moves, and most importantly, in this case, protecting.
Arcanine swapping out for the Amoonguss on Luca's side of the field. It looks like he, once again, is going to try and target down this Fluttermane, but this time around, no Ghost type to be had. That will be the Terra Fairy Fluttermane, and it will resist the Sucker Punch, but I think more importantly, it's going to threaten so much damage on this pure Dark-type Kingambit. It should be able to hold on through that Sucker Punch quite comfortably thanks to the burn and the typing. Moonblast, though, will fire back into the Amoonguss for a little bit of chip damage. Just get the special attack drop, which may or may not come into play, but Justin makes a great read there. Flare Blitz into the Amoonguss does do super effective damage, and I think most importantly, puts that Amoonguss within knockout range of a subsequent attack.
Yeah, that's a nice play. I think the Moonblast and Flare Blitz certainly covers, that's probably enough damage into the Arcanine as is, just because that Terastallization gives you such a big damage boost. I really like that Terastallization defensively as well. You can actually see that if you didn't Terastallize the Fluttermane, Justin's Fluttermane actually would have survived that Sucker Punch. So very good information to know going forward into the next Game 2 and possibly Game 3. But now you do see that the Moonblast, like you said, Gabby, is no longer neutral into that Kingambit. It is super effective. And if the Justin's Arcanine, I believe, is holding Extreme Speed, so you have an option to possibly knock out the Amoonguss before you can redirect anything with that Rage Powder and maybe get a chance to Moonblast this Kingambit.
Yeah, I think having Intimidate for later as well against Luca's Pokemon could come into play, but you do have to make sure that Kingambit is off the field before you reveal it. Luca's own Arcanine will be making an appearance once again, giving the Amoonguss the opportunity to utilize its Regenerator ability to get some health back. Protect on the Fluttermane means it won't be taking damage from yet another Sucker Punch from the Kingambit.
Yeah, a smart Protect there, I think. I doubt that Luka would have allowed that Amoonguss to go down because it is such an important player in this game, being one of the few things that resists Moonblast from that Flutter Mane, and making sure that you have a slot or two that can avoid getting put to sleep by Spore. That Sucker Punch, based on how that first Sucker Punch went, it's possible that is just a damage roll, so we could have maybe seen a Sucker Punch knock out that Flutter Mane, but it's hard to tell without seeing a few more just to get, you know, an idea of how those averages might play out. However, the Amoonguss coming in makes that much more safer for this Flutter Mane on the field.
Yeah, the Amoonguss certainly will redirect any attacks, especially if their name is Sucker Punch, towards its direction. Shadow Ball will connect with this Arcanine to pick up the KO, and this Kingambit did opt to go for a Kowtow Cleave here, which obviously will do damage in this case, but also I think, and most importantly, will bring Amoonguss down with a knockout from another attack, even with the health coming back from the Citrus Berry. So that's great information for Luka. Even though this Kingambit is burned, it's still putting so much damage pressure out onto the field thanks to that Defiant boost, and of course thanks to the Howl. Yeah, that Howl coming in really handy here, making sure that, you know, the burn is counteracted by that +2 attack boost, especially knowing that this Terra Dark Black Glasses Kingambit is so capable of putting out so much damage even in neutral attacks. That is a Amoonguss that took about, what, 70% from just a single neutral attack. That is almost unheard of, and even like threatening a 2-hit KO through Citrus Berry on Amoonguss with a neutral attack is crazy, and so making sure that you maintain that pressure with the Howl makes that Kingambit much more scary, because a lot of times I think if you burn a Kingambit, you can just kind of leave it alone, let it sit there, and maybe deal with it later, but the Swords Dance, the Black Glasses, and the Terra Dark make sure that you have to make have to keep it in mind at all times. Yeah, and Justin has such a tough spot to make here, because you have the option of knocking out the Kingambit, or you have the option of knocking out the Amoonguss with a Shadow Ball. You have to worry about those spores, because that is such a big threat for both sides of the field right now. And everybody's playing it safe with a Protect, and I do not blame them. No. It's so important to scout out your opponent's choices, especially in critical turns like this. So the great thing for both these trainers is, well, now you know. The bad thing for all these trainers is Protect is no longer viable, or guaranteed, I should say. And I don't think you necessarily want to risk the 30% chance that you get the double. I think it's better for both these trainers to try and find an offensive opportunity here. Well, and the great thing for Luka that turn too is that the Kingambit withholding its Protect means that it's an option this turn. Yeah. So if you do want to protect that Kingambit, possibly try and go for a Spore in this Flutter Mane to make sure it doesn't have the option to either Moonblast or Dazzling Gleam you. A Dazzling Gleam with that Terra Fairy and the booster energy might be enough to KO this Kingambit through the Rage Powder, except we're just seeing Shadow Ball instead. Yeah, I like the prioritization from Justin here, as I do think Spore on the Flutter Mane is the biggest threat right now, but unfortunately, one Amoonguss holding on Luka's side of the field, Justin's own Amoonguss being knocked out, and now Luka is free to Pollen Puff his own Kingambit back up to full health. That's a bit scary. We now have this Kingambit that's been doing a lot of damage at neutral, back to full health. Justin now only has 2 Pokemon left, one of those being the Arcanine, which would give it another attack boost, and that's a bit of a scary thought here. The Chien-Pao coming in, actually pretty nice for Justin though. A lot of players opt to not run a fighting move like Sacred Sword on their Chien-Paos. But we believe we do see the Sacred Sword on his own, because that slot often goes to Haze, which is on the Palafin on Justin's team instead. So clearing up that coverage spot means that Chien-Pao is actually threatening this Kingambit, and conveniently the Kingambit only has 2 dark moves in Kowtow Cleave and Sucker Punch that can deal damage, so the Chien-Pao does resist both of those. It does, but the Sword of Ruin ability might have lowered Flutter Mane's defenses enough so that Sucker Punch would be enough for the knockout, so Justin still has to be very careful going into this turn. I think that you can lock in the knockout with the Chien-Pao into the Amoonguss on your side, and at least remove the threat of Spore ruining any plans, and then just hope that maybe a double Protect, even if you don't necessarily lock in that Protect, would be enough to keep Flutter Mane safe long enough to get that Kingambit off the field. But instead, it's Chien-Pao is the one who is protecting. A Rage Powder from the Amoonguss means that this Flutter Mane will be picking up the knockout there if it can survive the Sucker Punch. It's going to be close. It was a roll last time, and with that little bit of a boost from its own partner, Chien-Pao, Flutter Mane gets knocked out by a Sucker Punch. That's a really rough spot to be in if you're Justin. You can either bring in the Chien-Pao and have the Sword of Ruin lower your Flutter Mane's defense, or you can main the Arcanine and increase the Kingambit's offense. And so I think in either case, though, a Sucker Punch is enough to clean up that Flutter Mane. And the Rage Powder just making sure no Sacred Sword goes into that slot. I think at this point, the Kingambit being a +3, you have no way to effectively damage it. Well, actually you do. You can finish off the Amoonguss with Extreme Speed and then go for a Sacred Sword. But even then, I think Kingambit may be able to stomach just one. I don't know. Chien-Pao is very strong,
and the amount of damage that does might be a game changer here. But you still, again, have the option for Sucker Punches. Clearly you can't Sucker Punch in extreme speed because it will be that +2 priority outspeeding you. But if you're able to Sucker Punch this Chien-Pao and at least break its Focus Sash, that could help you win this game with whatever's in the back.
Yeah, if you're able to hold on through this next attack from the Chien-Pao, you can just follow it up with another Sucker Punch next turn. Instead, we're going straight for the Sacred Sword. Kingambit going for a Kowtow Cleave to break the Focus Sash. Nope, just going for the KO on that Arcanine. Definitely the bigger threat, knowing that it has extreme speed available to it. It is now down to just the Chien-Pao for Justin Tang in game 1.
This Kingambit is putting in so much work here, and this Flutter Mane coming in is going to have that booster energy. It is the special attack boosting booster energy, so we do not see a speed boost here. But at the very worst, this Chien-Pao cannot knock out both these Pokemon at the same time. And I believe, based on how Flutter Manes are trained, oftentimes one Ice Spinner or Sucker Punch or Throat Chop is not enough for a one-hit KO. So you're pretty much guaranteed to get 2 attacks off here at least. And considering this Chien-Pao is holding a Focus Sash, it's exactly what you need.
Ice Spinner into the Flutter Mane. It does miss that
so
KO. Moonblast will bring the Chien-Pao down to its Focus Sash, and all this Kingambit has to do is Kowtow Cleave for the win. Luca taking game 1 in this rematch against Justin Tang for top 4 in Fort Wayne.
Really, really great play there. I think the Kingambit is such an important part of Luca's team, and I'm sure that Luca's played this team enough. I know that he was using this exact same Kingambit set back in Charlotte when he made that top 8 cut. And so knowing exactly how to play it, especially giving up the burn, like very early on, that Kingambit was burned on either turn 1 or 2, I believe.
Yeah.
But it still never left the field. It ended the game, I believe, at +3 attack after a couple Defiants and a Howl. And so just expertly well played there, knowing when to Pollen Puff it, when to Rage Powder, when to go for your Sucker Punches, when to go for the Kowtow Cleaves, and especially taking advantage of Justin essentially enabling the Kingambit's own damage with the Sword of Ruin and the Intimidate.
It's also interesting as well to just see how differently Kingambit's being played throughout this tournament.
Yes.
I think this Black Glasses Terra Dark set is so scary to face off against because most people were only bringing Will-O-Wisp just to handle your Kingambit matchup.
Right.
And with the ability to boost your own stats, you know, irregardless of if Howl is on the field as an option for you, you can mitigate the burn, you know, defects on your own terms. And like you were saying earlier, so many people tend to ignore the Kingambit. It just has that time to go for those sword stances and get the attack back. So I think, you know, Justin had the right approach there. You know, I liked how he got that burn on early. I liked how he tried to get some damage there, but it just felt like the Flutter Mane always had to deal with the other Pokemon on Luca's side of the field before it could focus in on the Kingambit. And that's what he's going to have to search for adjustments in game 2. Is there a way that he can either just ignore the other Pokemon long enough to just eliminate the Kingambit, or is that just how he has to play this matchup?
Yeah, the Terra Dark on Kingambit also coming in really handy for Luca here. I think a lot of times you're thinking, okay, it's running 2 Dark moves and Black Glasses, so obviously the Terra Dark is a purely offensive Terra, which is true a lot of the time, but if you think about the moves that people use to damage Kingambit, a lot of times it's your Flare Blitzes, your Heat Waves, your Earthquakes, your Stopping Tantrums, all of which become neutral when you lose that Steel typing. And so that coming in handy here against the Arcanine even, you know, you don't take super effective damage from Flare Blitz and you allow yourself to stay on the field for longer.
Well, Chien-Pao has found a new partner in this game 2 of this top 4 set. It's going to be the Palafin alongside of it against the Flutter Mane and the Arcanine on Luca's side of the field.
Interesting leads here. I like the mix-up from both players. I think if you're Justin, clearly you're just burn the Kingambit and then ignore it and try to KO the partner's tactic. Didn't really work in that first game. And if you're Luca, I don't know if you probably don't think that Justin lets you get away with that again, right? That went so well for you in that first game, despite getting that burn so early on, that you think Justin probably has to mix it up. And I think this Flutter Mane's actually pretty well poised here, especially given the Intimidate.
Amoonguss now taking the field to help redirect some attacks away from that Flutter Mane. Palafin also going to leave so it can make its true heroic transformation in this incredible match. Arcanine's Intimidate will be wasted on the Flutter Mane and the Amoonguss, but Chien-Pao could have done some damage. Instead, just playing it really safe this turn from both trainers. A Protect there, and what do you know? Another Protect. Just a very, very safe start for both Luca and Justin.
Defensive Switch plus Protect is a pretty tried and true game plan, especially on turn 1 in VGC, and it makes a lot of sense in both cases here. I think Justin comes out of the better end of this because you now have an Arcanine and a Chien-Pao facing down an Amoonguss. 2 of the things that do the most damage to Amoonguss in the whole format. Luckily for Luca, I believe the Chien-Pao is still at -1 attack. which means that the Flutter Mane would surely be able to survive one attack. I don't know if you want to give up that Flutter Mane so quickly, though, because certainly something like an Ice Spinner and a Flare Blitz would knock it out. Amoonguss doesn't really want to redirect either of those as well, so still a bit of a tricky spot.
No, and Justin has the advantage now of just trying to double into this Amoonguss straight away and remove it from the field, which I think would also free up his game plan. It was just one of those Pokemon that kept him away from the Flutter Mane, but the Arcanine taking the Ice Spinner attack and the Flare Blitz. Justin probably anticipating a protect from that Amoonguss.
Yeah.
Instead, Spore putting the Chien-Pao to sleep.
That's really not what you want to see if you're Justin. That's such a great Arcanine swap just to take that Flare Blitz and the Ice Spinner and also put that Chien-Pao to sleep. Importantly, the Chien-Pao at -2, so essentially if you want to clear those Intimidate drops, you have to swap it out as soon as you can. However, if you clear it out before, if you swap it out before taking that turn of sleep, as it hasn't yet, you essentially bring it back in and it's still going to be a sitting duck for an entire turn. So really rough spot to be in for Justin. We do see that Palafin was the third Pokemon we know, not the fourth yet. And Palafin switching into both Amoonguss and Arcanine can be a little bit risky because it doesn't want to be put to sleep or, more importantly, burned by a possible Will-O-Wisp.
No, and I'm trying to see if there is some way that Luca could possibly turn this game around, maybe get some momentum back. A Flare Blitz would be the first start. It almost picks up the KO there, but unfortunately does fall short. Arcanine taking a ton of recoil damage as well. Flare Blitz from Luca's own Arcanine brings Chien-Pao down to the Focus Sash, and Amoonguss could either pick up the KO there with a Pollen Puff or go for a Spore onto the Arcanine. It is all up to Luca. What did he choose? He chose the Spore, but he anticipated a switch on the Chien-Pao.
I think that makes sense. If you either catch the Chien-Pao staying in to burn a turn of sleep and give the Arcanine the sort of Ruin boost to Flare Blitz on Amoonguss, or you catch a swap and put something in the back to sleep. We know that the Arcanine on Justin's end is holding those safety goggles, so obviously you don't want to be sporing that slot, but you cover an option there, and now that the Chien-Pao is down to 1 HP, you have the option to either Sucker Punch it or Extreme Speed it for a KO later on in this game. So even though that Spore turn from the Amoonguss did get wasted, I think it's still a pretty productive turn for Luca.
Yeah, it's interesting that Justin opted to swap out the Chien-Pao as well to get Palafin back in on the field. Certainly does have a lot more of a defensive typing against the Arcanine on Luca's side of the field, but any chip damage here onto it, as we've seen earlier, can really limit its effectiveness as the game goes on. Extreme Speed will connect with that Palafin, and Arcanine now going for the Flare Blitz into Luca's own Arcanine, slowly whittling down its health. I would assume it's in Jet Punch range by now, but I would also assume that the Palafin has to worry a lot more about the Flutter Mane.
Yeah, certainly a Jet Punch clears out the Arcanine, but if you do Jet Punch, you open yourself up to a big Moonblast or Shadow Ball, both of which would probably come very close to not getting it out, but not finish off the job, especially because I believe the Booster Energy was already lost because it was led on that first turn. I don't know that the Booster Energy is such a big deal in the remainder of this game, especially because the Chien-Pao doesn't really, you don't need the Booster Energy to damage that thing. The Arcanine might be in Shadow Ball range anyway, and at this point you can try and just get things into range for either Sucker Punch or Extreme Speed.
Amoonguss now taking the field for the Arcanine, and Palafin opting for Protect. So once again, Justin playing this game very safe. Did Luca call that? It's Extreme Speed into the Amoonguss at least. That is some damage, and Dazzling Gleam as well. So still a great opportunity here for Luca to get some damage down, accounting for, you know, whatever Pokemon were to switch in. Unfortunately, though, with Amoonguss's support now, I think this Palafin can at least stop worrying about the first attack from the Flutter Mane, which does open up the opportunity to try and fire back maybe a Wave Crash at this point in time. Yeah,
that's certainly an option. If the Rage Powder comes out from Justin's Amoonguss, there's no way that the Palafin can take damage from the Flutter Mane other than a Dazzling Gleam. We do see the Amoonguss coming in for the Arcanine slot on Luca's end of the field. Amoonguss is such a solid swap into an opposing Amoonguss Palafin that I would have been very surprised if this didn't happen. It's just such a safe play to make here.
Yeah, and to follow that safe play up with another Protect on the Flutter Mane, Jet Punch will connect with this Amoonguss. It's not very effective, and it will deal some damage back thanks to that Rocky Helmet.
Very smart.
But Pollen Puff on Justin's side of the field will heal that Palafin all the way back up to full.
I really, really like that play from Justin. You either take a KO on the Arcanine, or the Amoonguss comes in, or possibly the fourth Pokemon comes in, and you maybe take some Rocky Helmet damage. But you know that the Flutter Mane on its own cannot KO either the Amoonguss or the Palafin that turn. So that Pollen Puff, and when covered by the Jet Punch, is incredibly safe. There's no chance the Amoonguss takes a Flare Blitz and gets knocked out by that. And so I really like keeping that Palafin healthy, because I think this Palafin is going to be really important. It can deal a lot of damage to everything on the field for Luca, except that Amoonguss. and it gives you a chance to contend with Sucker Punch with a priority Jet Punch.
Here is Justin's terastallization of the game. It's going to be a water type Palafin, as we've seen do very well consistently throughout this metagame and throughout the Regulation B metagame. And I really loved how Luca approached this turn as the Shadow Ball from this Flutter Mane targeting down the Amoonguss. The Amoonguss on his own side of the field, I believe, locked in a Spore against the Palafin, and I don't think this Wave Crash will be enough damage, even with the Mystic Water, even with the Terra. It is enough to pick up the KO on the opposing Amoonguss.
That's so much damage coming out from Palafin. Like, a Mystic Water, Terra Water boosted Wave Crash is so hard to contend with. Like, even Amoonguss, which is a grass type and will take resisted damage from it, couldn't even stomach that from just about half HP, and so that's a very, very big knockout for Justin to take. That's really the only thing that can be taking attacks from that Palafin comfortably. That Arcanine especially, you do have the Intimidate and a possible Will-O-Wisp spot for it, but you no longer have the option to Rage Powder a Jet Punch away. You are very, very firmly in Jet Punch range, so even after an Intimidate or two, you're probably still getting knocked out, and you get a big Spore off on that Flutter Mane. I thought maybe we were going to see a possible like Wave Crash and Pollen Puff double up into that Amoonguss slot to maybe cover a lack of damage there, but Justin clearly knowing his damage calcs well enough to know that you can go for a Spore there.
Yeah, given that these trainers have played already in one round, it's possibly that that was information given up in an earlier set, so there was no need to necessarily lock in that double, but still, I think very well played from Justin there. Knowing that the Flutter Mane is asleep as well on Luca's side of the field means that this Kingambit is really the Pokemon to lock in on, but you still have your Amoonguss there to prevent any Sucker Punches. There's no Defiant Boost activated, but there will be a Terastallization.
There we sure are. It's probably going to be that Kingambit once again. Yeah. We've seen this Terra Dark Kingambit do so much damage for Luca, and he's putting all his cards in this basket to try and claim the second game and move on to the finals with a 2-0 victory.
Yeah, we have the Terra Dark Black Glasses Kingambit versus the Terra Water Mystic Water Palafin. Different typings, but the same kind of strategy. Rage Powder, Flutter Mane still going to be asleep. This Palafin going for the big Wave Crash. Will it be enough to pick up the knockout on either of these two Pokemon? It goes for the Flutter Mane, and that is indeed going to be a KO. Kingambit on Luca's side of the field has an opportunity here to try and bring some momentum back to his side of the field with this big Kowtow cleave into the Amoonguss, but it's able to pick up the KO, and we are down to just the final two Pokemon from both these trainers.
That's a really big KO to take. The Arcanine coming in is now going to be able to intimidate this Palafin, and because the Amoonguss got knocked out there's no chance for Palafin to swap back out and in to reset that Intimidate. A Wave Crash, probably enough to knock out two Flutter Manes, honestly. That does so much damage into the Flutter Mane. Now that we see this Arcanine hit the field, we do see the Kingambit being boosted by Defiant once again, and I believe from the first game we saw that even if you burn it, not really going to help you.
Yeah, so I think that there is still actually the Chien-Pao with 1 HP lurking in the back of Justin's party, so I think if you are going to try and swap it around to drop the Intimidate on the Palafin, this is the turn you have to do that for, and Luca can easily account for that by just ignoring that spot this turn and then extreme speeding it the following turn, or you could just try and go for some damage into it now, but I'm very curious if we're going to see another attempt to burn the Kingambit by Justin's Arcanine, given what you just said, that it didn't seem to make that much of a difference in the previous game.
The nice option here, too, is that if you swap in the Chien-Pao and your Arcanine wins the speed tie with Luca's Arcanine, I think the Sword of Ruin boost might allow you to KO Luca's Arcanine with an extreme speed before it even gets a chance to try and knock out this Chien-Pao. So based on how these Arcanine speeds work out, this could be a nice turn for Justin here to get this KO before you lose your own Chien-Pao and give yourself the option to... oh, that didn't even KO, what?
Arcanine just barely hanging on to fire off its own extreme speed back, and with a 1-2 combo, again, the Kowtow Cleave will secure the knockout on the Chien-Pao. Now, Justin is down to his final two Pokemon. Still going to be the Arcanines in the red for both these trainers, and a half-health Palafin versus the Kingambit on Luca's side.
It's still, I mean, I guess the same point stands here now that the Arcanine on Luca's end is that low. Certainly one more extreme speed KOs it. And notably, I don't believe Luca's Arcanine has Protect because it opted for Howl in that slot instead, so that's a pretty reliable extreme speed into that slot. You do have to worry, though. I believe Luca's Arcanine is one that extreme speeded first. No, I think it was Justin's that turn. So if Justin's Arcanine wins another possible speed tie, or if it's just trained to be quicker, you have the option to knock out that Arcanine, but it's still going to be really tough to deal with this Kingambit, because I don't think one Wave Crash does it. It might be strong enough to stomach just one of those, and then you have to deal with the Arcanine and possible Sucker Punch, Kowtow Cleave, extreme speed mind games at this point.
I was going to say there still is Sucker Punch on the table, and I believe we haven't seen Palafin and King Gambit go up against each other yet. I think Palafin is naturally a bit faster, so it should be able to Jet Punch its way through the Sucker Punch concerns. We see one Protect. We see the first extreme speed picking up the KO on the Arcanine on Luca's side of the field. This King Gambit now, who did he target? It's the Sucker Punch into Justin's Pokemon, which...
This is so tough.
I gotta respect trying to call the Sucker Punches here because I think that you need this speed advantage.
Yeah, it's really tough here because if the Arcanine is able to burn this King Gambit, I think that's the only way that your Palafin's going to be able to take something like a Kowtow Cleave. Even then, it still might get knocked out. I like Jet Punch here just to make sure you get around Sucker Punch, but based on what this King Gambit does, that is really big for Justin there.
I was going to say, we did see the Sucker Punch lock into the Palafin thanks to our perspective in this matchup. Flare Blitz from Arcanine will connect with King Gambit as well. Not even attempting to go for the Will-O-Wisp, I think just content to possibly Extreme Speed and Jet Punch here to lock in a Game 3. If he's able to do enough damage, there could always be the threat of a Kowtow Cleave. There's the Extreme Speed. Here comes that Jet Punch. And we will be heading into Game 3.
That was such a great game. I really like how both players played that game. Just the way that they managed their options there, I think Justin, especially so, knowing that he had to preserve that Palafin, because that's really the biggest way he has to damage the Soul Terra Dark King Gambit. There are certainly worlds in which Luca wins that second game too. If you go for something like a Kowtow Cleave on the prior turn instead of the Sucker Punch, that's a really tough game to play because the Wave Crash is obviously double the power of the Jet Punch. If you want to get a lot of damage off at once, that's what you have to do. But you do have to expect, possibly Sucker Punch, which I think probably would have knocked out the Palafin. So if you're Justin, it's a really tough. I don't know. It's a set of scenarios that can go any different ways, and Justin coming out on top here.
Yeah, you have to make a lot of assumptions, right? Like if you're in Justin's shoes, you want to assume that your opponent is going to always click Sucker Punch, so you're always going to want to Jet Punch and hope that the combination of your two priority attacks is enough to out damage the King Gambit. If you're Luca, though, you're hoping that your opponent is probably thinking a little bit deeper and maybe just going for the Wave Crash anyways so that you can just get that Sucker Punch in. But it was a very, very close game, literally coming down to just that read. And I don't know if you caught that just now, Jake, but Luca has already locked in his 4 Pokemon to this Game 3. I think he's identified his best possible 4 Pokemon for this matchup, so possibly going for a playstyle adjustment in this Game 3?
I could see it. I didn't catch exactly what 4 he locked, but I do think that Luca obviously had chances to win that second game, and I think the first game was pretty dominant on Luca's end.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I wouldn't be surprised to see kind of a similar set of Pokemon being brought, but maybe an adjustment in the tactic. We did see the King Gambit sit on the bench for the first turn of the second game and be brought in the back, whereas on the first game it was just led and then stayed on the field the entire battle. So possibly another adjustment Luca could make is getting that King Gambit on the field to do damage quicker. Again, the only way that you have to mitigate that damage is with the Arcanine's Will-O-Wisp, but in the process you still give it a Defiant boost and you have to deal with the possible Howl from Arcanine. A lot of times Amoonguss is what you use to redirect attacks from it, but we saw the Terra Dark Kowtow Cleave do a KO through Citrus on an Amoonguss, which I still can't believe. And so there's a lot of ways that I think Luca has to protect this King Gambit that Justin still has to contend with.
Yeah, and even if he does lead the King Gambit directly into an Arcanine, there's always the opportunity for the Will-O-Wisp to just miss outright.
No, don't say that.
I have to call him. I know, that might be a commentator's curse here, but as we go into this Game 3, the winner of this game moving on to finals, the loser unfortunately going home for the weekend. Arcanine and King Gambit out against Fluttermane and Palafin on Justin's side of the field.
I really like the Palafin. I think Palafin was so big for Justin in that second game because it was the main source of damage for that whole game. Again, it's one of those things that can trade with Sucker Punch pretty effectively because it does have Jet Punch. You at least force Luca to think twice before just Sucker Punching anything willy-nilly. I like the Arcanine lead here too, obviously threatened by a water type attack from that Palafin even in the Zero form. But more importantly, one of the few things in the format that can stand up to Fluttermane pretty well.
Yeah, I don't think you risk the Palafin trying to do damage in the Zero form, though. Just given how important it was in that second game, you really need the boost in the attack that the Hero form gives you. And if you're going to make a swap turn 1, I think that you still probably have your own Arcanine in play, and you probably still have your own Amoonguss here as well. So would be a great opportunity to swap it in, just like we're seeing Luca do. He swaps out the Arcanine into his own Amoonguss there to redirect any Jet Punches, but also just to take a Jet Punch outright. Palafin taking some recoil damage from that Rocky helmet. A Shadow Ball from the Flutter Mane also connecting with that Amoonguss, bringing it down to just below half of its health. Now Kowtow Cleave into the Flutter Mane actually falls short of a knockout.
It does, but this is such a strong spot to be in now. This Kingambit now threatens a KO and Flutter Mane with Sucker Punch. Pretty much regardless of the board state, you could burn it, you can intimidate it because that would just boost the attack. But even a burn Sucker Punch probably KOs the Flutter Mane even if it Terra Fairies. And there's a very smart switch there. I think if you stand with the Arcanine and try to go for something like a Flare Blitz or a possible Will-O-Wisp into Palafin, you get punished pretty hard by the exact play that Justin made. And so recognizing that, doesn't want to take that risk, especially in game 3 and top 4 on turn 1. Gives himself the option to play this game no matter how that turn goes, and it comes out much better for it.
Amoonguss now taking the field. Flutter Mane going to protect, so it can get one last attack in when Amoonguss is there to protect it from a Sucker Punch. Amoonguss also protecting on Luca's side of the field, and Kingambit going for a Kowtow Cleave into the Amoonguss spot. Again, that is a
That's not even with the Terrestrialization.
That is a two-hit knockout, even without the Terrestrialization, but with the Citrus Berry in play, I don't think it'll quite get there damage-wise, but Luca could always do a combo Kowtow Cleave plus a Pollen Puff and easily pick up that KO.
Yeah, and the issue now is that like nothing can switch into that slot on the Amoonguss, like especially if the Kingambit Terrestrializes, which you do have to worry about the Flutter Mane's Fairy type moves if that does happen, but with a Terra Dark Kingambit, nothing takes a Kowtow Cleave very comfortably. Certainly the Palafin in the back doesn't want to take it. This Amoonguss will get knocked out by it. If Justin does have the Arcanine again instead of the Chien-Pao, a +2 or +1 rather, Terra Dark Kowtow Cleave might just clear it immediately. So a pretty tough spot here.
Arcanine coming back out onto the field to threaten that Amoonguss with some Flare Blitzes, also holding the Safety Goggles item, which means that it will not be threatened by any sleep in future turns. A Shadow Ball special defense drop could come into play as Kowtow Cleave is enough to pick up the KO on Justin's own Flutter Mane.
Yeah, it's a big KO there. The Flutter Mane being gone means that that's one of the big damage sources being gone from Justin's end. Obviously, the Palafin is still around, and if that comes in this turn, which I imagine we'll see, it'll be a pretty prime spot for it. The Arcanine on the field and the Kingambit being asleep, still having that first turn of sleep to take. Arcanine actually coming in here instead, which I think still makes a little bit of sense. You know, you have the Kingambit, which does get Defiant boosted, but it is locked into sleep for at least one turn. It has not yet Terrestrialized, so if you're able to get a Flare Blitz in that spot, you can possibly get some big damage off on it, and more importantly, intimidating the Arcanine that probably won't be able to knock out this Amoonguss in one hit anymore.
Yeah, I also really like how Justin waited until the Kingambit was put to sleep to send in the Arcanine. Like, I think we've seen this play a couple of times throughout the weekend where you just hope that the sleep turns will last long enough to find yourself an opening, and with your Palafin coming back out onto the field in hero form, this is certainly the opportunity to go for that. Luca will not be taking any chances from taking a super effective Flare Blitz, going straight for that Dark-type Terrestrialization on the Kingambit, which makes sense. I mean, we've seen Luca lock into this 3 games now. It's very clearly how he's comfortable playing this Kingambit, and knowing that you don't have to worry about as much damage from that Flare Blitz either certainly makes things a little bit easier to breathe at this point as you're trying to fight your way through with a Will-O-Wisp miss onto the Palafin. That is such unfortunate luck there, as now Palafin should threaten a knockout on both of these Pokemon.
Well, you cursed one of them. It wasn't Justin, but you got Luca instead.
Sorry.
I think that's a really smart Will-O-Wisp either way. Like, the Amoonguss being in there doesn't threaten anything because the Arcanine is holding the Safety Goggles. You want to swap the Palafin in to eat a Flare Blitz. That Will-O-Wisp covers that very well. Unfortunately, this Palafin now in a very prime spot to start firing off some very strong Water-type moves. The Dark-type Terrestrialization coming in handy to block some of that Flare Blitz damage, but still going to have to take at least one more on this turn.
Yeah, I like prioritizing the knockout onto the opposing Arcanine as well, just not giving your opponent any more chances to land that Will-O-Wisp. Flare Blitz into the Kingambit, does not pick up the KO, but Kingambit still is asleep. And again, once again, this Palafin is threatening knockout damage from a Jet Punch, and I think you have to go for a Flare Blitz plus a Wave Crash, though, to knock out the Amoonguss, and so you don't have to worry about your own Palafin now being put to sleep.
Yeah, it's rough. This Amoonguss, I don't know if one Flare Blitz does the job, just because a lot of Amoonguss are trained to be very bulky. You can no longer Terrestrialize it as well, which means that it's going to be guaranteed to take that Fire-type super effective damage. However, if Kingambit wakes up here, a +1 Sucker Punch might even be enough to knock out this Arcanine with that Terrestrialization and the black glasses. So regardless, a pretty tough spot to be in here. This Terrestrialization probably going to be from that Palafin to get that extra damage on the Wave Crash and Jet Punch.
Will Kingambit wake up is the question to ask here if you are Luca or if you're Justin. But once again, both of these powerhouse Paldean Pokemon taking the field. A Terra-boosted Jet Punch into the Kingambit is enough to pick up the knockout there, but this Palafin now is at risk of being put to sleep by a Spore, and Luca still has the Flutter Mane in the back as well. Flare Blitz from this Arcanine into the Amoonguss. It just barely misses that KO. Arcanine taking recoil damage from the Rocky Helmet from the Flare Blitz, and now Amoonguss Spore into the Palafin to put it to sleep.
Okay, the Spore going off there is nice for Luca. It's still pretty tough though, because this Arcanine and the Palafin both have a priority move, both of which can knock out the Amoonguss before the Flutter Mane can attack. If that is an option here. The Flutter Mane has not hit the field yet, so luckily for Luca, it does have the access to this booster energy, so we'll have a boosted special attack for the remainder of this game. And the Rocky Helmet on Amoonguss actually coming in very handy here, putting this Arcanine pretty low from the Flare Blitz and the Rocky Helmet recoil, to the point where certainly a Shadow Ball, most likely a Moonblast, probably not a Dazzling Gleam, unfortunately, is able to finish it off.
Palafin swapping out, even though it was just put to sleep, and Amoonguss taking its place on the field instead. Arcanine opting for a Protect, correctly waiting out the Protect on Luca's own Amoonguss.
Oh, that's really big, yeah.
This Flutter Mane now went for a Dazzling Gleam, will do a little bit of damage on this Arcanine, or on this Amoonguss, but it is not going to threaten any sort of KOs here, at least for a couple more turns. I don't even think a Booster Energy boosted Shadow Ball would be enough damage to pick up the KO on the Amoonguss at this point.
No, certainly not, and Justin's in a very great spot here, because now if he goes for Extreme Speed, that Arcanine will be able to knock out the Amoonguss before the Flutter Mane can knock it out with a possible Shadow Ball. And then the Flutter Mane goes to sleep, and at that point, I don't think that Luca has enough damage to kind of break through both the Amoonguss and the Palafin in the back, and the Arcanine remaining here. So a very likely Spore coming out to Flutter Mane as it knocks out this Arcanine with a Shadow Ball. Will flip the game 2-1 in Justin's favor in terms of Pokemon remaining. I believe the Palafin hasn't taken its first turn to sleep yet, though, if I'm not mistaken.
It has not, so we're going to end up in an interesting situation here where both the Flutter Mane and the Palafin will be at approximately the same odds for waking up each turn.
Right.
Fortunately, Justin does have that Amoonguss still on the field to redirect those attacks, and I think that should be the difference that ultimately would side the game in his favor, but this game is not over yet if one of these Pokemon is able to wake up before the other. For example, I think if the Flutter Mane wakes up, goes for the Shadow Ball into the Amoonguss, and it crits, and then the Palafin stays asleep for one additional turn after that, I think Luca still has it, so he needs a little bit of luck. But this game is not over.
Certainly not.
Palafin, first turn asleep. None of these Pokemon are going to wake up here. I'm also curious what this Amoonguss goes for. Like, yes, you can do a little bit of chip to the Flutter Mane, or you can heal up your own partner with Pollen Puff, which is exactly what we see Justin do. I
think that's smart, just making sure the Palafin's at as much health as you can get it. A single Wave Crash knocks out Flutter Mane like we've seen before, and a Pollen Puff is double resisted by this Flutter Mane and certainly won't do any kind of meaningful damage. And so if by some miracle Luca can knock out this Palafin before the Flutter Mane gets knocked out, there's still a world in which he can win. I think, like you said, Gabby, that probably relies on both the Palafin staying asleep for as long as possible and the Flutter Mane waking up soon. We haven't seen either wake up yet. I think it's about a 33% chance for them to take a second turn to sleep here, so it's going to be rough. The Palafin not waking up, it seems like it's going for Jet Punch with that priority.
I think it is, but both these Pokemon remaining asleep for yet another turn. This is really kind of scary. I mean, it looks like Justin has sort of sat back in his seat. I think he knows what his plays are at this point. Luca as well. It really just comes down to who set their alarm 5 minutes earlier, knowing that they can wake up that much sooner and be the first person to get to have breakfast.
Yeah.
This Amoonguss, though, will be first in line thanks to that Rage Powder. Palafin's Jet Punch does indeed come through. Will connect with this Flutter Mane, and it's just enough for a one-hit knockout. Justin Ting and his second of 3 regionals will be moving on to the finals for his second time.
So impressive. 3 regionals.